Hi, this is Andre Koen. I want to say thank you so much for joining this conversation. And we're going to spend a little time talking about this notion of privilege, right? So these are going to be some reflections on privilege. We've done a lesson before about privilege. This is kind of the follow up, the reflection of that particular course. And if you're interested, contact me. We'll make sure that you get access to that course if you haven't, if you don't have access. And otherwise, I still think you can follow along with this. So, so when we think about this notion of privilege, first of all, what the question is, what is privilege, right? And again, I won't go through the whole lesson, but what I will share with you is that when we talk about privilege, we're talking about both earned and unearned privilege, right? So we all have privileges. I happen to be cisgendered male. I happen to be African American. I happen to be mildly attractive. But no, that was a joke. Anyway, so we all have these privileges, and the real question actually is the question we should be answering is what do we do with those privileges that we have? But we'll get to that in just a second. So, so one of the things, before we start getting into those questions about privilege, I really want us to think about this notion of rights versus responsibility, right? Or what is the relationship between rights and responsibility? Are they even connected? And I would say, when I think about my rights and I think about the relationship with responsibility, I think they're interconnected, right? So I do know that, like when I joined the gym, that as a person who was taking a tour, I had some limited rights, right? So I could like walk around and that kind of stuff, but I didn't get full liberty in the in the gym until I was or the freedom to move around until I was a member of that gym. But even in my membership, if I want to keep my membership, there are some responsibilities that I have to live up to keep my membership at a gym that I pay for, right? So when we what I like to for us to think about is not rights versus responsibility, but rights and responsibility, right? So when we think about how we're interacting with others, there are some things that are our rights. But we also have, because we've chosen to live in communal settings, there's some responsibilities that we also must undertake, right? And to ignore one of those without recognizing the counterbalance or the complement of the other is to kind of act irresponsibly, right? So to ask for your rights but not recognizing the responsibility that it goes along with those is irresponsible, and in some cases I would say even immature, right? So there's a certain amount of maturity that comes with recognizing the relationship between rights and responsibility. So what does that have to do with this notion of privilege? Well, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but I want to ask you what privileges do you currently hold, right? So do you have privilege? Now, some people automatically go to like a racial preference privilege, and that could be it could be a privilege. Racial preference could be a privilege. Some folks go to a, academic or educational privilege. Some folks may focus on their ability to have their body do whatever their brain wants it to do, right? So having some physical privilege, or some folks may go to a place of being whatever your culture says is attractive, right? So those could be privileges. What I want to say is that oftentimes people comment or ask me about does this privilege or that privilege exist. One of the things I'm not in the and I learned this from my eighth grade teaching, um, is that it's not my job to convince anybody of anything. So if you don't think you have privileges, it's not my job to convince you that you have them. I'm just going to put that out there, right? So like I did with my eighth graders, it wasn't my job to convince them of things. It was my job to lay out all the pieces so that they can connect the dots for themselves, so that the meaning is derived through their exploration of those things, because that's when it took, right. That's when it meant something. If I said memorize these facts, or just do this thing, they would certainly do it, but it wouldn't take root in the behavior of their lives, right? And so when we think about these privileges, if you don't think you have privileges, I'm not. It's not my job to convince you otherwise. But if you recognize that there are privileges that you have, my question then becomes like, what do you do with that? And one way to think about that is to recognize this concept of gratitude. So what is the purpose of gratitude? You don't have to answer that right now. I just want you to think about that, right? Well, why is gratitude? Why is it important to to have gratitude, right? And then how do you show gratitude? So when we think about this notion of privilege, what does privilege have to do with gratitude? Well, what I would suggest is that if a person does not have gratitude for a thing, you will mistreat that thing that you don't have gratitude for. You will not respect that thing that you have, that you should be holding gratitude for, right? You may not even, in some cases, know where those things are. And the example I like to use is like Allen wrenches. Allen wrenches is the thing that looks like a little seven or L, depending on how you use it. We have those all the time, but how many of us actually know where they are when it's time to use it? Right? You're like, where is that Allen wrench? Oh, what? Why? I don't have gratitude for it. But when I do use that thing, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I had that Allen wrench. Oh, that was great, right? This recognition that whatever so-called privilege that we have, if we don't have a sense of gratitude for that, then it can become a tool used for evil as opposed to good, which is this next question. So, what happens when we forget to be grateful about something, right? So, I've heard people say, "Well, I didn't have to pay. I have privilege because I didn't have to pay for college because my parents paid for that college." Well, if you're not grateful for that, what your what you may not recognize or even want to admit is that your parents had to work hard to get that money that they paid for you, or your great grandparents had to pay great, so you lose all perspective when we are not grateful. And so when I think about this notion of privilege, I think it's important that we also not forget that privilege, whether earned or unearned, can become entitlement, which is when it's a problem, right? The privilege isn't a problem until it transforms into entitlement. And it typically turns into entitlement because we've not been grateful for what we have. Right. And so then when that entitlement kicks in, not only do we say, I deserve this because I am so great, without the recognition of all the work that others, as well as yourself, had to put into this thing. It also becomes a weapon to say, well, they should do it too. Why haven't they done what I've been able to do? Because you've lost perspective, because you have not figured out how to be grateful. And so when we think about this notion of privilege, and we think about power, right? These are the concepts that will help us stay humble and focused so that we can be effective. This is not about political correctness. It's not about, the social winds of change. This is about creating leaders who can be effective in everything that they do. And I would submit to you that it is through humility, through gratefulness, recognizing what privileges we have, those that we have earned and those that we haven't earned. It is through those processes that we're able to self-actualize and become more effective and better leaders. My name is Andre Koen. I want to say thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thanks. Bye.